Miss Mama Work.
Hello, my fellow artisans, and welcome back to a different version, non-digital this time. I already showed you how I made this with pencil on paper, and now I am coloring it with my watercolor palette. I always adored watercolor. I adored watercolor since I was very little because there was this big book that my paternal grandparents had by Rien Portvliet, which is an amazing artist, and he made a lot of stories about leprechauns. I think leprechauns, because in Dutch it's called the kabouter. So it's yeah, so that's leprechaun, and it's you probably have heard about it because it is an international book. It's got David, the leprechaun, or in Dutch, David the kabouter, and it was not necessarily a children's book, but it was so amazingly animated. I loved those pictures of this little fancy creature living a very homely life, actually, with his wife and two children, and it was very professionally, no, not professionally, it was uh, very much made like a documentary or like a biology book, because it really described like every habit that they had and everything that they would do in terms of rituals or how they would court and whatever. If you do not, or I think another word for this, gnome. I think that's the word for it. David the gnome. And I absolutely loved that book since I was a child. My maternal grandparents were a lot younger than my paternal grandparents, and my paternal grandparents were more like, okay, we haven't had small children in quite a while. How can we keep them busy, especially a girl that's not really into going outside? So they gave me those books to read, and I love them. Being Portland is also very well known for his animal watercolor pictures, very realistic animal and wildlife watercolor pictures, and I always aspired to draw like him, although especially in this painting it is way more art nouveau and not as much as David the Gnome as I thought it would ever be. But I recently picked up watercolor painting because I really wanted to give it a try. I used to have like very cheap uh, watercolor pencils and watercolor palettes because I thought if I don't like it or if I'm rubbish at it, then I have not spent that much money on it. But what I discovered with this palette, which is I already showed it on there, but it's a Gogh Royal Talens palette, a very nice palette that my mother-in-law recommended to me. Like, this is so much better than those cheap pencils and the cheap palettes that I had before. They actually give off color. I instinctively know how they work, what to do. I only had to do like one or two tutorials to see like how it would flow for me. I still have a lot to learn, and there are things that I probably did by mistake or that I did wrong, but I really like the outcome and how this all worked, especially with the mermaid and the natural colors that it had. But the reason that I wanted to make this especially was because, well, first of all, it was May, so mermaid was a bit in the back of my mind, but I also really love uh, water and watercolors, and I thought, what better way to use a watercolor palette than with a watery mermaid? One of the things that were the most challenging in this aspect was the skin color and creating colors that kept consistent in a way that I wanted it to be. The algae especially were a color that constantly changed, and even though it made the picture really interesting, I wanted to be less vibrant and more into the background, but I just couldn't get that in the way that I wanted. As for the background, I thought I would use a color that would really pop out from the blues and the greens that I already used, because I wanted it to be completely different from the rest of the picture. And I thought if I use yellows and reds, it would be, the yellow would be more like the beach, and then the red would be just the lining. So I thought in that way about it. One of the things that I really have to learn is to have patience with this, because I am used to color things digitally and you don't have to wait for things to dry, you don't have to wait for things to mix, and that really bothered me after a while. That after if I wanted to change anything or wanted to add a color, I had to wait before everything was dry. I also added a black lining around the most important things that I thought would be had to be lined. I think most people in watercolor who do watercolor do this with a pencil, but I have this very fine brush that I really like, and it also helps me not to be too one-sided with the lines. I want to be I want to be able to create thicker lines if I want to, and to be more playful with it instead of having like a marker or one thickness of a line, which makes it a bit more too rigid for me. All in all, I'm quite happy with the outcome, because I this was the first time I was doing like this big of a project, and it was quite a thing for me, because if I color it in, not digitally, I can't go back. So it was quite a challenge for me, but I really love to do it. So this is the result, and I hope you'll like it. If you want to see more, please like and subscribe, and I see you next time, my fellow artisans. Goodbye.